time the gods of the scheduling have not been super favorable to me, because I know there's like a really, really nice panel going on in the other hall. But this makes me kind of pretty secure that you guys who are here actually really want to hear about the stuff I have to say. So I'll go through this to the slide, but I think we're probably going to have a little bit more time at the end to just have questions and talk, because I guess that's kind of like the best value for you as well. Since the topic of the talk is to make the most of your publisher. And this is basically something that in my experience is, you never know what you don't know. And if you're kind of like a developer that is kind of like making their first game, and going into looking for a publisher, having different options. What can you do? What can you ask for? Like, what's your role as a developer in front of a publisher that at first might seem almighty and might have the possibility of choosing you or not? So it's always like a relationship that's a little bit fraught with misunderstandings. And I just want to kind of like talk a little bit about my experience having seen things from both sides. Right. So. Intro and ground rules, we're going to talk a little bit about what goes into selecting a publisher, what can you ask a publisher, so what are good questions to make sure that basically the publisher that you're talking to is right for you. What do you expect? What can you really expect in terms of services? What can you expect and what should you expect in terms of what the publisher does for you? A little bit about the publisher lingo, which basically, like, how do you talk as an equal to a publisher? How do you basically put yourself immediately in a position of kind of like eye-to-eye contact, right? You're not going to be like the growling little developer that kind of like, wants something, but you're just going to be an equal partner. And to do that, it's good to like know their language and know how to speak to them. Again, ask a doctor if your publisher is right to you. Apart from the kind of profile and the services that a publisher might have, is the publisher itself, the people, how do you determine whether a collaboration with another company is going to be fruitful or not? And in the end, no choice is also a choice. No, self-publishing is always an option. When do you go the self-publishing route? What are the kind of like things you have to look at? And what kind of can you expect if you self-publish? Because in the end, it might be the right solution for you. And knowing when to do that, when to make that decision is kind of part of the game. So, short question, who here is part of a developer team? Please raise your hands. Okay, cool, most of you. Who has a publisher already? Okay, two. Who's looking for a publisher? Okay. And are there any publishers here? Oh, all right, you know who to swarm later on. Wonderful, thank you for coming as well. So let's start. Intro and ground rules. Who am I? Right, so my experience, I'm Philipp, of course. My current company is called Metagames, where I'm the co-founder and COO. But my experience in the past in terms of the gaming industry has been mostly on the publisher side. So I've been working for Area Games, which is a kind of like a San Francisco, Berlin-based publisher of, at that time, MMORPGs from Asia for PC. And then they started to go into mobile as well. And I was both a producer, so very much on the live ops monetization side, and also on the portfolio side, kind of dealing with, with all the teams within Area Games as a publisher to launch new games. So when we would get a new license for a new game, you need to basically build kind of like the marketing infrastructure for it. You integrate it into the back end. You build a product team that leads that game as a in terms of the publishing functions. And then I briefly went to Fiber for about a year, so ad monetization, not super relevant here. And then I was asked to build and lead the GRI office here in Europe. So we built, the office here in Berlin. Of course, GRI at the time, a very international publisher based in Japan, with kind of offices in San Francisco, Melbourne, and here in Berlin. And again, we were kind of a live ops office. So we would kind of, take the games that were licensed by GRI, and operate them in the European territories in terms of localization, live ops, customer support, and so forth. And I also did funding and kind of like sourcing for GRE in terms of talking to developer teams across Europe, understanding, if there were, potentially kind of like good targets for a collaboration with us as a publisher, great developer teams, great games, seeing kind of like what they're doing. And I think out of this experience is a little bit, what I kind of like can talk about today. And then Greek closed at some point. They kind of shut down their Western operations, and I decided to actually descend into the arena and become a developer myself. So co-founding this developer studio here in Berlin. And we've been doing that for the last year and a half, and it really gave me a lot of insight into how difficult it actually is to make a game. Right? If you're a publisher, you kind of like look at all these options. You look at people asking for meetings and pitching their games, and you see so many of them, and you kind of look at them and it's like, so that's cool. What's the team like? What KPIs do you have? When do you soft launch? So the kind of usual, like kind of down to earth publisher questions, and then make a choice. Do you want to publish it? Do you not want to publish it? Mostly it's no. But you really don't have the insight into what goes into building a game and what are the choices that you need to make and the compromises that you need to make as a developer. And this is something that as developers yourself, you can very clearly kind of keep in the back of your head when you talk with publishers, that they think they know everything, but they actually don't know almost anything about really making games themselves, unless they have internal development. But that's a little bit of a specific question. So again, out of the kind of like, seeing both parts of the coin from my experience, let's see how I can help you guys. Ground rules. So the experience, again, mostly mobile, right? But it does apply basically to PC as well. I think there might be some differences in terms of the importance of, for example, user acquisition, which on mobile is supremely important, and also something that is a kind of like a skill that as a typical development team not necessarily have so much insight about, so where a publisher can really help a lot. But so don't just take this for mobile. This is mostly for mobile. But more importantly, it just assumes, like this talk assumes some commercial ambition for your game, right? And this is like a little bit of a debate, and I certainly don't want to open the can of worms about who's an indie and who's not an indie and what makes an indie. But there are certainly teams that just want to make their game. They don't really care about like who else plays it. They do it from themselves, and I think that's totally fine. But that's a really hard situation to basically look for a publisher in that situation. So, I think there's like a lot of kind of space for games as an art form, but in terms of kind of like really just looking for a publisher, you'd really need to want to put out the game out in the world and not just build it for yourself. So this is basically, I think, like the fundamental aspect of it. The first real aspect and the first real question that you ask yourself as a developer: do I build this game for myself, or do I build it for an audience? And if you build it for an audience, if you can, accept that you're not building it for yourself, then a publisher can like really help you and will help you. If you're just building it for yourself, it's also fine, but it's going to be like a hard road to really get a publisher, and you probably don't even want any. So these are the ground rules. Right, does your publisher fit with, and this is very important, because in the end there's going to be a lot of publishers that you're going to talk to, and every publisher does have its own focus and its own kind of like areas of expertise. So not all publishers are created equal. And you really need to profoundly ask yourself, does the publisher fit with your game? Does it fit with the genre? Does it fit with the audience? And does it fit with your team skills? The game itself, of course, and especially the genre, is something that's relatively straightforward. If you're building a game that's like a mid-core game or like a casual, hyper-casual, whatever, you don't go to publishers that have maybe a track record or that publish games that are more on the hardcore side. It seems relatively obvious, but I've seen a lot of developers come to, for example, again, when I was at GRE, trying to pitch me games, and they were clearly outside of the scope of what we were doing, of all that we had done in the past. And there, nothing remains but give kind of a, like a negative reply. And it is something that, it's time that the developer itself could also have saved by just, basically informing themselves. So this is something important to do for you as well. Your audience, again, this is something that, especially like in my case, now that, for example, we're building a game that has a very, very, very well-defined audience and a very well-defined market segment. Not all publisher will be able to help us access these segments, right? Are you building a game that's targeted toward women from 30 to 40? You need a publisher that has experience with games that target a similar audience, even if it's not maybe the same kind of game or the same genre, but at least if the audience fits, that's a good thing to talk about, right? And that's something that you can expect then the publisher to be interested in your game, because even if they see, well, we don't do mid-core, we only do casual, but we intimately know the audience that you're talking to and that you're building this game for, we're going to be able to help you. So they're going to be much more straightforward in saying like, this is, this makes sense. And in the same vein, your team skills. Right, so every developer is also not created equal, and there's different people that are part of the founding team. There's different people that come in as the developer grows, and some of these, the classical publisher functions, which are like live ops, monetization, localization, customer support, community management, or marketing, user acquisition, marketing, testing. You might already have like within yourself, like within the team. And then you can look for a constellation with a publisher that maybe has more of a focus on, for example, live ops. If you lack that skill within your team, look for someone who is maybe more in that direction rather than things you already have. Again, and this is like really like a very, very general kind of like first choice. Like when you have a list of 20, 25, 30 publishers, really look at, like, ask yourself these questions, right? Does it fit with my game? Does it fit with the genre? Does it fit with the skills I have? And then you will see that the actual number of potential partners will decline a little bit, but you will have definitely like a better conversation with them and like be much more on the same page, which is extremely important. So what do you expect in general? Like overall checks. So whenever, and I think this is one of the most important things, whenever you're talking to a publisher, and I've seen many developers not do that, and just basically start conversations. Basically, again, check that the publisher functions that the publisher offer or is famous for or whatever fit with your team. Again, look, check the skill fit, but definitely look at the track record. And make sure that you can talk to other developers that are in a relationship with this publisher. And I think this is probably like the single biggest thing that you can do to make sure that you're gonna find like a good partner. The publisher should always be, and I think this is like a ground rule that, again, for you as developers, have no qualms about it. Like, this is your full right. And you should always be able to talk to other development teams that already have a publishing contract with that publisher. And they will tell you if that publisher is good. If they can tell you, if they don't tell you, if they tell you, we can talk to you, that's a really huge red flag. Like, just abandon it. It doesn't make sense. It's only going to be a problem. And it's ultimately better to have no publisher than a really crappy one, because once you have one, you're basically really tied. It's really tied in. So if you don't find anyone who can speak positively, who has worked with this publisher and can speak positively about him, then it's probably not going to work out for you either. So, run. Now let's look a little bit at the kind of like functions where you can expect help and what you can actually expect in terms of what you should make use of, right? Because in the end, the service, like the relationship between like a publisher and developer, is not only about executing the functions and operating the game, but should also serve to help you grow as a team, as a company, help to improve your products. And so I'm going to kind of go into detail about the kind of like the three main points, which is ARM, so acquisition, retention, monetization, to basically help you understand where publishers can help you and what, again, is your full right to expect them to help you, and where you will become better as a team and learn things if you know what you can ask and what you should ask. So in terms of acquisition, it's a little bit tricky because usually you go into a like publishing relationship with a publisher when you already have KPIs, when you maybe have soft launched the game, so you already have like made some research about basically your market, like your target audience, your market segment, and this is, I think, also something important, that when you ask for things and ask them for feedback and ask them for opinion, don't necessarily only do it for what you are going to do or doing now, but also just ask them for feedback on what you've done. If you have a good game in soft launch and you find a great publisher, tell them what you did and ask them for the feedback and see if there's something that maybe you have missed, because they are doing this kind of day after day, right? So they will have good feedback that will allow you to improve a little bit maybe with your next game. And so again, as a developer, like this is basically really like the almost the most important function, well, the second most important function of a publisher. Beside operating your game, they also need to help you become a better team and make a better second game. So ask them about your marketing test, right? Like on Facebook, trying to understand your marketing funnel, trying to understand your marketing KPIs, the CPI you can expect, what have you targeted, how did it go. The analysis of these results is not always straightforward, but asking your publisher to really this is what we've done, this is our presentation, please tell us what you think about it. They will be very, very happy in telling you and kind of like helping you improve. Competitor intelligence, also something that App Annie and Priority Data and whatever subscriptions are relatively expensive. So if you need information about one of your competitors, about the market, ask them as well. They will have access. They can provide you the data. There's no need to kind of like go around and ask friends and whatnot. They're there to help you. Platform relationships is a little bit less important now that the kind of like importance of features has declined a little bit. But also something that it will help you maybe with ASO, like App Store optimization. Again, definitely all things that you can expect the publisher to help you with, that you can ask them, that's your full right to ask them, and where you will like get a lot of important information out of them. So that was acquisition. Retention, live ops information and integration. Basically understanding how they will do live ops on your game can help you immensely as you're still developing it maybe, or continue to develop it, to make their life the easiest possible. And also teach you, a thing or two about live ops in general. So that's something super important. Game design help. Again, basically the fundamental message is whenever you have a question about like something, you can go to them and ask. And it's something that, again, they have experience in, and it will help to make your game better. Game testing as well, user testing infrastructure, right? Like how do you actually do good user testing? It's something that's extremely elementary for a good game. And again, as you kind of develop it, and as you're like, maybe it's your first game as a developer team, taking care to kind of like cover all those aspects with them will again help you and just make your life way easier. Right? So retention, monetization, again, monetization design. And BI tools, especially BI tools, as you're going to have a kind of like a contractual relationship with the publisher as well, who is basically going to get all the money from your game and then is going to give you a part of it. Make sure that you still build your own BI infrastructure. We had like a really good talk from like Wargaming about how to do that just a couple minutes ago. So that you can basically always check. Like don't only rely on data they send you, but ask for access to their tools. This is something that should be a given, that you can always look at how your game is doing, in terms of like live service. Again, it's something that's totally good and okay to ask for, and it will help you getting more insight into your users. And again, if you want to build like a parallel infrastructure, it's probably even better. Also, insights and experience, design in general. As soon as you have something, as you're building something, submit it for review. You can always ask them for opinion. They will provide you with good feedback. You don't need to, of course, implement all of it. But it's really extremely helpful and valuable to basically tell them what you're doing. And they will, again, help you to make a better game. Speaking the publisher lingo, right, relatively clearly, I think the most important thing is here that your game will probably change, and it's a good thing. Mostly because if it changes, it is because the publisher has seen how to operate games. They're going to test a lot. They're going to, provide kind of like suggestions that maybe feel a little bit weird at first. But definitely it's valuable. And to make you understand and put you a little bit into the mindset of a developer, of a publisher, they basically have like two drivers. So one is making a profit, and two, see their knowledge valued and validated. This is something that, again, I personally, a lot of publishers that have a great respect for developers and for the art of making games, but they also want to feel part of that, right? So the classical internal debate between a publisher, basically proposing what's right for monetization and making that better, and the developer saying, "This is my creative vision, this is my game, leave me alone." That is like the profound misunderstanding that comes from maybe not fully understanding that the publisher really just wants to see the knowledge valued. So even if you're not going to do it, just gather what you can. And again, they have experience, so it probably does make a little bit of sense. I think we're running almost out of time. So basically, most important thing from the human side of one is like face-to-face contact, right? So check if they fly you out, check if they come to visit. Don't make it, if it feels too transactional, if it feels like, oh, you're just another, game in our portfolio, just, let's do this quickly, this is the contract, blah, blah, blah. It will not be the right publisher. And a lot of kind of publishers do it, but it's not for you as a developer. It will not give you like a lot of value. So again, reach out to other developers, see what they do, see how they communicate once the deal is done, because everyone's kind of super sweet and nice when you kind of negotiate. But the real deal is when it's done, when the communication and the relationship is established, right? And it's never okay to kind of, again, feel as inferior, to feel that, like this publisher, we have to kind of like, we have to be liked by them, we have to kind of try to get on their good side. It's always a relationship between equals. Second, third, maybe most important thing, get a good deal. And this is something that I guess just in terms of like the practicality, always check agreements with a lawyer. A lot of companies don't do it and then find stuff that they're surprised about. It's money well spent. I know it is a little bit of money, but it is really kind of, again, from experience, it is extremely valuable. You can push for changes. Like the publisher is always going to give you a contract that's good for them, right? And this is the kind of like starting situation. So if you don't push for changes, you're doing something wrong. Simulate the implication in terms of how, for example, money is distributed and when it is sent to you. Does it fit with your financing? Does it fit with your investment? Does it fit with your cash flow? These subtleties in the contract will have a huge impact on your daily operations. So look at what it means, right? Do like a kind of like a cash flow simulation on what these terms means for you as a company, and always check the numbers when you get the reports. Alternatives, when not to choose. There is always, options. There's self-publishing options, which sounds very daunting at first, but it doesn't have to be. Especially lately, there's, a couple of like really good companies that will help you outsourcing live ops functions, for example, like customer service. Used to be like this huge thing with like a really big kind of commitment in terms of like headcount. It's not like that anymore. Other live ops functions in terms of like monetization, in terms of analytics. There's a lot of stuff that is actually not that complicated to use. Consider also UA funding options, which is something that also has been like sprung up lately, because ultimately in the end, if you have a game on your hand that's really good and performs very well, you'll maybe be able to scale it, but then maybe you kind of like lack the funding. And at this point, it's not a bad idea to go to, for example, UA funding companies. Look into them. Again, always check if who else is using them. There's LiveOps consultants as well that are kind of like very acceptable for the price in terms of like what they give you as a company. They help you set up. So when not to choose, basically, if you don't find someone who fits with you, don't be afraid to look at the option of going by yourself. It's not as hard as it might seem or as people might say. But it's also, of course, not super easy. So be realistic, kind of with your skills, your time, and your priorities. Sometimes it's worth it to kind of just have the freedom of continuing to work on other games and just give it to a publisher, even though it might not be like the perfect one. But only you can, only you can determine that. So ultimately, as they say, what you remember from a presentation is always kind of the best part in the end. If you forget everything else about this presentation, remember these 3 things. Talk to other developers, negotiate the contract, and accept that your game will change. And then you will have a very, very good relationship with the publisher you'll choose. And always remember, he's there for you as well. Thanks so much.